So I talked about you being the animal, right? The one that you have is actually pretty similar, but it's the primitive.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. He's good at this, I think.
So the difference between the animal. So the animal, it's like an undomesticated animal. It's a very raw emotion, being able to just get out. The primitive is similar in the sense that it has this undomesticated feel, but it also has absolute humanity behind it, right? It's if you've taken an animal, you've made them human, you've combined both traits. That's more what the primitive is. They talk about, I don't know if you guys ever watched Home Improvement.
Yeah,
Tim Allen was often called the primitive, and the way he expressed it was like,
yeah,
right? And I don't see like the grunting and such, and it's definitely more like a caveman feel, is like when you're going way archetype with it. But when you're just talking about like being human, but not necessarily following strictures of humankind.
Okay, yeah. I saw Tarzan was one of the people.
Yeah.
In your examples, and that's a character I've always kind of just loved, and interesting.
Yeah.
But like comedically, I've never thought of it in that context, I guess.
Yeah. So what's funny is like if we were going to do an improv moment, right, and we had an animal and primitive next to each other hanging out with a know-it-all. That just sounds funny by itself.
We would call it tardigress.
And it would look a lot like this.
Tardigress at all.
But what's interesting about it too is like, so we're talking about neurodivergence, and you guys are
as neurodivergent as it can
diagnosed
get.
ADHD and embraced it really to some extent, right?
Yeah.
That's part of your lives. And one of the reasons I think these hit so well is, and so full disclosure, I will probably often be referred to as neurotypical.
Sure.
And I despise the term, but I also get the value that it has.
Yeah.
Right. So it's while I personally, being called neurotypical, I don't relate to it, but I understand its meaning.
Sure.
Fully get that,
Well,
by the way.
Totally, yeah.
Fully
It's
get that.
weird to set, because we're talking half of people that have a myriad of conditions are neurodivergent, and everyone else is neurotypical. It's not great.
It honestly felt weird. I questioned saying it earlier.
Yeah.
Because it felt like a weird term.
Yeah, we should just call him the know-it-all. He's just a know-it-all.
Know-it-all typical.
Just kidding. I really
Know-it-all
want to go
typical.
through a lot of these too to see if there's other because there's always looking at yourself and then looking at what other people would notice from the outside.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And just as a side note before we move on, I think what the primitive would look like most, in my opinion, in my videos, I would use the word probably spastic.
Okay.
Or something like that. That sort of energy where it's like still in a totally human way, but just like rather than being animalistic, it's more of just like spastic energy sort of stuff. If that makes sense. It's not a perfect word either, but that's what I've used in the past.
You know what is a strange thing when I'm thinking of that and thinking of you and trying to connect the primitive, I get this image of rudimentary tools in my mind, and I picture stuff that I feel like I've seen you make little stuff to do something that feels like a kind of rudimentary tool that you would use. Some people wouldn't. Some people would only be like, there's nothing that I have to either buy something like this or I don't have something like this, but you kind of are just huh.
If anybody's wondering, one of those rudimentary tools is literally the entire organization of Thunderfeather.
Yeah.
That's a fair point.
Because I think that even just outside of comedy, I have had to create a lot of my own things to make it work with my brain, and just because nobody's ever done what we're doing before with Thunderfeather. But once it works, I'm satisfied.
Yeah.
If it's doing its job, it doesn't matter if it's the Swiss Family Robinson Rube Goldberg Rube Goldberg machine, but that's what it feels like. A lot of the stuff that I make is. That's a great observation.
Yeah. So, The other one that I've identified in myself, and self-identification isn't necessarily the best way to go, but since I haven't really met anybody else who has gone through this,
Yeah.
it's the traveling angel.
Okay.
Now the literal description is a perfect character who doesn't learn, grow, or change in the story, even if they're a lead character. Now,
that is an interesting. That archetype
No,
is like immediately. I'm like, oh, my brain is like kind of seeing that in a lot of different stories.
Totally.
That's a really interesting
Yeah,
archetype.
and the reason that I identify myself that way is only because there's so often where I feel like all my changing happens outside of the view of the world.
Oh, interesting.
And
For example, does this look like a grandpa? Or does this look like an unchanged
Human tardigrade.
25-year-old man?
For real. Yeah.
but so like for a situation like this, I think I will adopt the persona of a know-it-all traveling angel.
Yeah.
Which will probably mean in the next one I'm going to have some glasses.
Okay.
Cool.
Because that gives that feel of, he knows what he's talking
And
about.
the wings, or we'll make the wings.
And the wings of
You'll
course,
make the
where-
wings out of sticks and
out
leaves.
of actual wings. I'll just tear them
I will
off
eat
of a
the
pterodactyl.
bird. I will eat the bird. You will take the wings and attach them to sticks. And then
What I was going to say was going to be 18 times more graphic as a joke, but then I realized it was a joke to me, but I'm like, we don't promote animal violence unless you're Landon.
unless you're real hungry.
And you are an animal who is violent.
you are violently animalistic because someone told you to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you got a note.
Because
Letting
you got
go.
permission,
Yes.
basically.
Yeah.
So you'll wear glasses?
Yeah. Well, and if I wanted to take the extra step, I'd move into like a British accent, and
Okay.
and I would be the British one on our
Interesting.
little
Okay.
discussion. But I'm not going to go that far because
C-3PO.
that's because the point is not to become somebody you're not.
Right.
The point is to embrace the element that people will be able to connect to.
Yes. And it feels like this is, in the same way that George Lucas made Star Wars with the hero's journey in mind, it didn't cheapen the hero's journey just because it wasn't like intuitive.
Right.
And so in the same way, the education isn't going to harm anything. And that's actually a really good neurodivergent point. Because I think a lot of people are hesitant and sometimes this is diagnosis, sometimes it's just using the tools and the tips and tricks that work for neurodivergent people, or giving yourself permission to do that. Is there something sort of intimidating about like, am I going to ruin any of the good stuff I have going on by just like codifying everything, or seeing behind the scenes, or just like understanding too much? And that sounds kind of weird, but I feel like that has happened in different ways. And I think that, it can only help by like learning the tips and tricks that work for some neurodivergent people. It might not work for you, but there might be one instance that it does. So it's better to know it than to not, like, to know it and not use it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, and I just realized that the book that helped me learn all these things
Is stupid.
Stupid, volume 1.
it's one of my favorite books, and I can't remember it off the top of my head, so I'm going to open it up just so that I can give the proper credit. And it's How to Write Funny, but more specifically, How to Write Funny Characters by Scott Dickers. I 100% recommend this person's book. And Scott, if you happen to see this, I would love to have you on this show.
That would be
Totally.
Yeah,
That's so
to
great.
talk about this.
I feel like it's so fascinating. It feels like a whole world of opening this up. I really love, one of the things I really love is, I've noticed, is categories.
Yeah.
Categorizing things.
Totally.
And like once you see stuff like this and it has a name,
Yeah.
as soon as something has a name, you can see it all over the place. It's a
Yeah.
crazy phenomenon we should talk about sometime.
Like the
But-
color blue.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
which
and-
we should talk about that,
That.
because I got some thoughts
Totally,
about
totally.
that.
And
But-
also, like, sometimes some colors don't exist till you give them a name. Like,
Right.
like
Right.
pink doesn't exist in Russia.
And magenta doesn't exist at all.
No, yeah, we'll talk about that.
See, Outlandish.
Outlandish.
Yeah, it's
For
a
more
fair
on
thought it was
magenta.
yellow.
On how yellow is fake.
Yellow is fake.
Yellow is
and
fake, and magenta isn't real.
doesn't
I just
exist.
learned this, and I don't know why, but I'm intrigued.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'll send you a link to the
You
video.
should watch Outlandish. It's
But
great.
also,
We should put that link right here.
yeah,
Here.
pointed it, man. All of us at the point.
Right. Yeah, there it is.
It's gonna be like,
I immediately thought the same thing. No, but the red pink thing is like they don't have a word for pink in Russia. It's just light red. In the same
Yeah.
way that we have light blue, baby blue would be a
Right.
totally different color if we had a different name for it. So
right.
Yeah.
naming things really gives it power. And in my neurodivergent journey,
Blink.
which
Baby blue, blink.
oh blink, I thought you meant blinking like this, and I'm like, you're right. Blinking is just closing your eyes really short,
That's also true.
but it's a totally different action.
You recognize a blink.
A blink.
I actually still don't know what we are talking about with
So
baby
is
blue
this
and blinking.
is this not a blink though?
That is not.
I'm gonna open my eyes eventually. How is that not a blink?
Was it a long blink, or did you just close your eyes for a bit?
light red, dude. No such thing as
Fair
pink.
point.
Yep.
Anyway, what I was gonna say is neurodivergent wise. So I was diagnosed at like 24, much later in life. And there's a lot of reasons for that we could get into.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those reasons is that our ADHD manifests pretty differently in some specific ways. And those are the ways that they diagnose it. And then we're very similar in other ways.
Yeah.
But being able to name things like decision paralysis or executive dysfunction, it's
Right.
not just laziness, it's executive dysfunction. There's a
that's
difference
huge.
if you're neurodivergent. And so like things like that we'll get into later, it's just so hugely important.
And it gives you an action to
Yes.
to take.
Yep.
Right. When you're lazy, it is something that is a fault within you.
Totally.
When you are having executive dysfunction, it is something that's happening to a very good person.
Right.
Right.
And a non-lazy person usually.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
And I just spent most of my life thinking that my executive dysfunction was laziness until somebody's like, oh yeah, I just don't want to do it. I could. And I'm like, wait, you could do it? If you decided to do it, you could do it? Okay,
Man.
we're different. What I'm
something
experiencing is
else is
different.
happening, yeah.
Because I could never do this right now. There's nothing that would make me do this except for like dopamine or all of the other tips and tricks that work, right? But just forcing myself to do it. So, yeah, a really important part of my journey was realizing that. And that's kind of like all words, right? Like we as a species, we are a word creating species. And a lot of people think that's why humans have been so successful is literally our language is maybe at the center of it because our social connection kind of depends on that language. And that's the thing. You could meet someone you have never had any contact with and both know like what day is, what night is, what food is. These are just sounds coming out of your mouth, but you know what it means.
Right.
And that's like immensely powerful on the level that we're talking about with concepts that we haven't learned all the way down to a child can communicate with their parents and survive because of it.
Well, weirdly, just having words to describe and define something so well can lead to, even if you just speak a different language from somebody, but you both have a very clear definition of night and day, you could figure out what their word for it meant because the words have given you such a clear definition.
Yeah.
And suddenly you know exactly what they're talking about, because
Yeah.
you just have very clearly defined definitions of it. Otherwise, it would be like, I don't know, it looks darker than it was. You know what I mean? And it's
like darker.
a
What does that mean?
really
Right,
nebulous
right,
kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's like, I know night and day, anyway.
Right.
No,
It takes
totally,
something from being a feeling that you know is true to being something that you understand.
Yeah.
Which, like these archetypes, that's exactly the same thing. This is a language, a small micro language within the English that we're speaking, and even within storytelling, because that's a language of its own, and creativity and art is also kind of its own language. Artists kind of know. They have their own language. But like this, for example, once we learn these things, we can communicate on a higher level than we would before just because we know these terms.
Right.
Yep. I think something too that's interesting about the categorization that happens there is that, like you were talking about, not becoming somebody that you're not, just emphasizing something that's a part of you. I feel like for me, there's a lot of times where I just am more comfortable in a situation where I understand my role, where I understand what I'm there to do or what I can contribute specifically. And I feel like that's kind of like these is basically being like, oh, now that I have defined this in my mind, I realize, it'll be easier for me to see times where I can jump in and add
Yeah.
that little piece of myself. Like,
Totally.
oh, I'll add that part. I'll add that part. You know.
Yeah.
Something that just came to mind is I remember a long time ago when you and my older brother would hang out a lot, because Landon's slightly older than me. He would hang out with my older brother, and I remember my older brother came home one time and he's like, yeah, so do you ever get the thing where you don't know exactly who you are, which nobody does when they're a teenager, and he's like, but you find these different parts of yourself through characters that you watch, and you just like take on different attributes from different characters, like, and it's your whole personality for a while or whatever. And he's like, I was like, yeah, that totally has happened to me my whole life, and I've always wondered, like, who am I really? Because I watched this movie and now I'm this character. I read this book, now I'm this character. Right. And you told him, you're like, oh, that's a very common thing with actors. And I came to find out.
I was just thinking that.
I came to find out it wasn't just a common thing with actors. It's a very common thing with neurodivergent people, because it is part of masking. And all neurodivergent people mask to some degree, from, you know, a lot of ADHD people slightly mask in some situations, all the way up to masking 100% of the time for a lot of autistic people. And that's kind of part of it, is finding those sorts of things. But what's cool is that, like, there's always an element of yourself in the mask.
Right.
And there's always, like, those two things aren't always things that are separate. And that's not true. Some people have masks that aren't them at all.
It's kind of the only way to do it sustainably.
Sure, yeah.
Is like, when you've got enough practice masking, you learn that you have to be emphasizing some part of yourself to maintain it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people will mask inauthentically in dangerous or unhealthy situations. And so we're not talking about that. That's something I wish people didn't have to do, unfortunately. But, you know, if you're at home and you're like, man, like, I watched The Lord of the Rings and I was just an elf for like 5 years, but then I watched Star Wars and I was just a Jedi, and that was my whole personality. And then I sat down and I'm like, well, am I an elf or am I a Jedi? You're both. And the fact that you were those things mean that those things are elements inside of you, and you don't just contain one thing. Humans are multitudes. You know, we have these internal multitudes of experience and elements to our personality. We're gems with tons of facets to them. And that's something that usually when you get older, you get more comfortable with, you intuitively learn. But just know that, like, if you are in that moment of just, you kind of don't know who you are because of that, that is who you are. And who you are is an adventurer on a journey to discover what those facets are.
Right, because in the end, you're not trying to discover the person that existed before you got here.
Yeah.
You're discovering the person that you are navigating yourself to be.
Totally. You're discovering bits and pieces of it along the way.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I like
it's
that.
not all choice, and it's not all instinct, right? There's going to be some of both. And it's really valuable to be able. One of the things that is really hard for me when I'm teaching or helping anybody in a situation is discovering somebody who has imposter syndrome. Now we all kind of have it, right? It's talking back to like the masks we create. We're put in situations we're uncomfortable. We pretend we know what we're doing.
Yeah.
We assume everybody else is not pretending. And so we're like, they're going to figure out, I don't know what I'm doing. And they're going to unmask me and realize I'm an imposter.
Yeah. I can try to record again and see what happens. It's going.
Yeah.
So I don't know when it cut out for sure. But you're talking about imposter syndrome.
Maybe it turned off because of the low battery.
Probably didn't.
Notification.
Yeah, so I'll just keep my eye on it.
Yeah. But yeah, at any rate, imposter syndrome, what can be so hard about that is it feels so isolating. Yeah. But if you can just get to that moment where you can recognize, you know what? We all feel it, and technically, maybe it's true for all of us.
Yeah.
But if it's true for all of us, then none of us are the imposter.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like the idea of imposter is something you're not, like something you're not supposed to be.
Not supposed to be.
And it's like, oh, if all of us are that way, then none of us stand out. Like there can't be, we can't all just be imposters.
Right.
Yep.
You know,
The fact that you faked it and got there is probably what at least 80% of our life is.
Yeah. This is making me remember a conversation Landon and I have had a lot. as we're kind of discovering ourselves and growing up, we call it character crisis. And what it is that like you identify with a character, and then for us it was like, we're the chosen one in our own story, but we play different roles. And oh, there it goes. Okay, so we're going. Character crisis. Sorry, we've had some camera problems. It's a tool that we've used. Well, the tool that we've used is called multiversing, but a character crisis is when you're looking like, I am this one character, like I'm the chosen one, but then other things happen that somebody else feels like the chosen one, or you feel like you're a different character, but you want, like, for us it was Peter Pan, right? Like we both have a thing for Peter Pan. And when we were younger, it was like, well, who's Peter Pan? You or me?
Classic grown-up child.
Totally, yes. And there were a lot of, I think, moments where it was like, well, I felt like Peter Pan and you felt like Captain Hook. And I was like, I don't want to feel like Captain Hook. And I felt like it and the captain instead of the chosen. If that makes sense to you, that's great. If it doesn't make any sense to you at all, that's also okay.
Yeah, I think we'll dive into...
We'll totally get more into it.
We talk enough about that I think it would be a great thing to dive into.
To just really get into. But the character crisis is kind of that... the word we use for, like, you don't know who you are, what character you play. And then we realized that, like, there is a multiverse of stories out there, and you're going to play tons of different characters and tons of different stories, and your own story and other people's stories, and that, like, being okay with that and realizing that, like, you are the common thread throughout it all is kind of like the multiverse solves the concept, the philosophical specific concept of the multiverse for us in this situation kind of just helped us through the character crisis, if that makes sense at all. We'll get more into that.
To wrap some of that back around, one of the situations is we discussed how many people we know that in their story, we are R2 and C-3PO.
Yeah, we're the droids.
We are the droids for a lot of people.
We had no idea.
In a lot of circumstances.
Because we were running around being protagonists, and we didn't realize we were just the freaking comic relief for most of the people we know.
They see us together, and they just see C-3PO and R2-D2.
Yeah, totally.
I can see that.
And each you're a different character in different friend groups and in different situations. Maybe at work you're one, maybe with your theater troupe you're another one, or maybe with your family you're one, or this other group of friends, your high school friends, and it's okay.
Yeah.
And it's good to know that acting differently with different audiences doesn't make you inauthentic.
It makes you an actor. It makes you an artist.
It makes you a person.
It makes you human.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah. And we should get more into it in a future episode.
Well, let's for wrapping it up, I'd be interested just to hear, like, just one thing you're excited about having gone through this today to talk about in the future.
Yeah, I think I was really excited about how organic it was. We just kind of went from one subject to another. I think that's a good place to go. We might want to talk even more about future plans, just so that other people could be aware of ideas that we could have of other things. But I really like, it seems like there's a wealth of shared experience as artists, as neurodivergent artists, as friends, as theater people, as creators, as actors, as writers, as directors, that we can pull from. And I'm just realizing right now that it's like, oh, we went through a lot of things, some of them very unpleasant, and we're going to be able to help people not have to do that. Yeah. And if anything, that's what we want to do as a group, is just like the tips, the tricks, the tools, the hacks, the names of things that you've always experienced that you can finally put words to. That's what we're here to do. And so I'm most excited, I think, that there's going to be those nuggets that people are going to just uncover and find, and that's it for me.
Yeah, totally.
I would say along those lines, we give so many, you've heard a lot of them in this just episode, we give a lot of names to things because it's very helpful. And all of us are very interested in that kind of categorization like we were talking about, and principles that we have just names for things that help us to, as people and as creators and as neurodivergent people and as reluctant neurotypical people. But we've got
take that.
Yeah. But we've got stuff that has helped us so much as we've discovered those topics. Yeah. And I'm really excited. And it just spans the whole spectrum of different parts of life. Professionally, personally, all over the place. And I'm really excited to talk about those things and how they, like, what other people have discovered when it's like, these archetypes, and we realize, oh, those are in there, or just things we've come up with. That's something among the many things, that's something I'm excited for with this.
Neurotypicals and neurotardigrades.
Tardigrades.
Neuro-know-it-alls.
Yeah, that's well. And for me, I am really excited for the idea of having people connect with us on this, like whether that's in comments or doing the side-by-side things, which have names that I just showed how old I am with by saying the side-by-side things.
Actually, I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay.
Like
it's like the shared talks.
oh no, I know what you're talking about.
Hank Green, help
You're
us.
talking about when someone makes a TikTok and you make a TikTok.
It's like an echo.
like duet?
Duets. Oh my
Yes.
god.
I'm the one that does TikTok as my job. Also, invoking the name of Hank Green is kind of like our patron saint. It's like,
Gotta be.
I feel like I'm going to do that.
But so what I'm really excited is for that, right? For somebody.
Saint Hank.
Yeah.
Saint Hank.
But it's for somebody to be able to say, hey, you guys talked about this. This is something that hurts me. This is something that is important to me. What do you guys know? Or people just to tell us stories, right?
Yeah,
I heard you talked about blue not being a color, and I didn't realize it was one till I was 15. Something like that.
We want to hear from you.
If that is the case, please come with us on the
Let us
podcast
know.
because you probably have an interesting life, my friend.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what.
Again, so excited to have people to talk to.
Yeah,
Yeah, for
absolutely,
sure.
absolutely. Yeah.
And this has been really good for me because we get together semi-often, sometimes more often, but having something that also just brings us together as a group, I feel like we have a lot of stuff in common that we don't get to talk about enough.
Well, and such diverse experience too.
Yeah.
Right.
But such an energy together that is awesome. So
Yeah, it's fun to use that to explore all this stuff.
Yeah. Agreed.
Mule noodle tardigrades.
Noodle.
Do the noodle dance. Okay, I'm going to stop it. Okay, so I'm just going to look really quick.